How's it going, guys? CotC here. Today we're going to be looking at the second Sacred Blaze unit introduced into CotC, Lianna. Lianna is the adoptive sister of Ophelia Clement, one of the playable characters from the original Octopath Traveler, and is also a significant character in her storyline as a result. In CotC, she takes on the role of an ice cleric, with a kit that's full of powerful multi-purpose abilities. She sets herself apart from other clerics released so far in that she's not a dedicated healer like Millard, doesn't have access to regen like Agnes, and isn't a particularly offensive-minded character like Stead. That being said, she still has some very interesting abilities that make her an equally interesting character to use. Lianna is voiced by Ayumi Tsunematsu. She isn't particularly known for her anime voice roles, with the most prominent that I could find being Marina from Gundam 00. She does, however, have a couple major roles in some other recent Square Enix titles, notably providing the voice of Magnolia from Bravely Second, as well as Milo from Triangle Strategy. Lianna's stat spread leaves a lot to be desired. Her magic stat isn't particularly high, capping out at 360, and her SP is hilariously low compared to other clerics at a maximum of 350. Her defenses are her most notable stats, especially her very high magic defense, which help keep her a bit sturdier. Her maximum speed is a bit on the lower side, which can be both a boon and a burden depending on how you're trying to utilize her. When trying to apply buffs to your allies, she would probably prefer to be faster, but when trying to heal allies' HP within the middle of a turn, being slower can sometimes be better. Lianna's kit is full of powerful options that have multiple effects, allowing them to be used in a multitude of situations. Let's start with her offensive options. Her most notable attacking skill is her 3-hit ice AoE, which also inflicts 15% attack and magic down on all enemies for 2 turns. This is an incredibly powerful skill against multiple enemies, reflected in its massive 80 SP cost. It's a skill that we would like to be able to spam freely in order to continually reapply the attack and magic down debuffs, but because the SP cost of the skill is so ridiculously high compared to her max SP, this can be a bit hard to maintain. This can be a very useful skill to cap 30% alongside her own debuff skill, which we'll come back to in a bit, or another ally's debuff such as Viola's anti-attack. Utilizing other skills alongside this can also greatly extend the duration of the debuff and remove the need for Lianna to continuously spam the move and lose all her SP. Because Lianna's magic stat isn't particularly high, on top of her lack of any built-in damage increase, the damage of this skill tends to be on the lower side, despite having a very high base potency of 3x80. To be completely honest, I would have been okay with this skill having a much lower potency in exchange for a much cheaper SP cost, but we take what we can get. Apart from this skill, Lianna's other ice skill is a simple 2-hit single target, a much cheaper option, but at the same time doesn't offer any of the additional utility of the offensive debuffs. For staff options, Lianna has a 3-hit AoE and 2-hit single target, similar to her ice options. Her 3-hit staff AoE also applies 15% speed down to all enemies for 2 turns. Similar to her ice 3-hit AoE, this has a pretty crazy high SP cost of 70 per use, making it fairly impractical to keep spamming over several turns. Her 2-hit staff applies 15% ice defense down for 2 turns. Since the duration of the debuff cannot be increased by boosting, it means that Lianna would have to repeatedly cast this skill in order to maintain the debuff, but that also means that she isn't casting ice skills to take advantage of the debuff in the first place. The main reason you would want to take this skill is to boost the damage of another ice DPS unit such as Sophia. Even though Sophia is capable of applying 30% ice defense down by herself, it would cost her an extra turn of using an inferior move as well as taking up one of her ability slots, so letting Lianna help her out can take some of the burden off of her. Additionally, if SP preservation is your concern, this is a much more economical skill to use in fights against a single enemy compared to her 3-hit staff, which costs almost twice as much to cast. Next, let's take a look at Lianna's healing utility. By default, she starts with a very standard full front row heal, a simple yet effective option. At 3-star, she gains what is in my opinion her most defining skill, a full front row heal that also applies 15% magic and magic defense up for 2 turns. The full potential of this skill is unlocked once Lianna has reached level 88, allowing the duration of the buff to be extended via boosting. This allows Lianna to grant magic and magic defense up for 5 turns to your entire frontline, while simultaneously healing. This is an amazing skill in fights such as Varkin, where you want to focus on dealing more ice damage while simultaneously lowering incoming light damage. A recurring trend in Lianna's kit, this heal does bear an insanely high SP cost as well at 82 per cast. Since the level 88 upgrade isn't an SP cost reduction like her other abilities, this skill unfortunately keeps its ridiculously high cost at all times, but in my opinion, the value gained from being able to increase its duration by boosting makes it well worth it. Moving on to her 5-star skills. The first is a single ally 15% attack and magic up for 2 to 5 turns based on boost level. If the skill is used with 3 BP, it also gains priority and grants a one-time physical dodge to the target. There's quite a bit to say about this skill. Single ally buffs are typically not considered very good value, as you would much rather use a full party buffer such as Lynette. However, when the skill is used with 3 BP, the priority granted to Lianna allows her to buff the target ally before they attack, which can increase their upcoming damage output while also applying a one-time dodge, which can be used to keep the target ally safe from one hit and can be very useful if casted on a more fragile DPS ally. This one-time dodge could also be given to a taunt unit while also increasing their damage output. This is not a skill that I personally find myself using very often, as I feel it doesn't bring enough to the table, and Lianna's other skills provide more useful utility. Lianna's other 5-star skill is a standard revive, just like Anya's and Alphen. Just like with those two, you need to carefully assess whether or not the revive is worth bringing over the other options, rather than just blindly throwing it into your kit. Lianna's last skill is a debuff, inflicting 15% attack and magic down on a single enemy for 2 to 5 turns, based on boost level. This can be stacked with the debuff from her 3-hit ice AoE in order to cap 30% attack and magic down on a single enemy. Depending on what other units you have available, as well as the number of enemies you're facing, this may or may not be a skill that you want to bring. For example, if you're lacking another debuffer such as Viola or Kurtz in your party, this can be a good skill to bring to allow Lianna to hit the debuff cap by herself. On the other hand, even if you do have one of those debuffers, if you're in a fight with multiple enemies, you can use both their debuff as well as Lianna's on separate enemies in order to cap 30% down on the entire enemy force and ensure they're dealing as little damage as possible. Next we have Lianna's passives. Her 1-star passive works while she's in the front row, giving all back row allies some extra HP regen on top of the passive regen that they already get at the end of each turn. While this technically promotes Lianna being in the front line as much as possible, we should just treat this as a small bonus and liberally switch Lianna to the back line when needed in order to make sure she's not constantly running out of SP. Speaking of SP, her 3-star passive lets Lianna restore SP equal to 4% of the damage she takes. While this is a very helpful passive to help Lianna's resource pool stay in a healthy position, it does require that she get hit in the first place, and is also mitigated by not only her high natural defensive stats, but also her own magic defense buff from her heal skill. That being said, we should treat this as a bonus similar to her first passive, rather than something that we should be going out of our way to try and optimize. One last piece of Lianna's arsenal that we have to talk about is her exclusive accessory, which can be obtained by exchanging 100 fragments in a Sacred Blaze banner. Her accessory gives her 200 HP, 20 SP, and reduces her SP cost by 20%. This is obviously a very powerful accessory that does pretty much everything Lianna would want. The additional SP and the reduced SP cost give her a lot more room to work with. Reducing the SP cost of her heal buff skill down to 66, and her 3-hit ice down to as low as 52 once she's reached level 96, which is much more reasonable. Additionally, the extra HP allows her to take more punishment, and maybe even restore a little bit more SP, rather than getting knocked out. We talked a lot about the various options Lianna has, so let's get into my recommendations on what skills you should be taking. First, we need to ask ourselves, what role are we intending to use her as? Clearly, Lianna is not designed to be an offensive mage-type character. Despite having access to some pretty powerful multi-hit magic abilities, her stats and passives do not support a high damage playstyle, and her SP costs don't support spamming the same ability turn after turn. I would classify Lianna as a very strong support character, being able to apply team-wide healing while also applying buffs and debuffs that can be used to stack with other unit skills to easily hit 30% caps. On that note, I'd like to make it very clear that I do not consider Lianna to fall under the healer role, and would not try to run her as a solo healer, nor do I think she should be directly compared to the other healers. You should run her alongside another unit who can serve as your main healer, such as Teo or Anyas, and use Lianna for supplementary healing as well as buffing and debuffing. Because of this, my first two recommendations for her skills are her 3-hit ice AoE with attack and magic down, and her full front row heal with magic and magic defense up. Both of these skills are excellent options that provide a lot of utility to the team. The final slot I would consider to be a flex slot based on the situation of the fight. For general play, I would probably bring one of her staff attacks for coverage. I'd be more inclined to bring the 2-hit staff single target due to its cheaper cost, especially when Lianna can boost her regular attacks if she wants to hit additional times. However, against multiple enemies, you can consider bringing the 3-hit staff AoE as well. In more difficult encounters, especially longer ones, my first consideration is actually to bring her full front row heal that doesn't have buffs. This gives an alternative healing option that doesn't require nearly as much SP expenditure. You can also consider bringing her single target attack and magic down debuff in order to cap with her 3-hit ice AoE. The 2-hit staff with ice defense down debuff can also be a good option to bring if the enemy in question is weak to ice and you can pair Lianna with an ice DPS unit such as Sophia that can extend the duration of the debuff. As a final option, Revive can be a pretty good third slot if you want a little bit of extra safety and Lianna's utility from some of her other skills isn't needed. Alright, that's been quite a lot of information, but that wraps up my overview on Lianna. She's definitely not a straightforward character, and there are a lot of intricacies to both setting her up and using her in battle. Hope you guys enjoyed the video, and as always, if you have any questions, feel free to leave them down in the comment section below. Up next, I'll be starting to put out content for the upcoming Re2 Cup, so keep on the lookout for that. And until then, this has been CotC. See ya!